You're driving profit. You're not driving quality, and you're sure as heck not driving safety.
Congressman?
I just gave you 3 examples.
Congressman, I disagree with your premise. Our business model is safe airplanes. That's the only sustainable business model for Boeing.
Boeing stood on stage in 2017 and called it the future of the single-aisle jet, the 737 MAX 10, the longest, biggest, most passenger-dense version of the best-selling airliner ever built. Airlines didn't wait to see if it worked. They just bought it. Ryanair, United, Delta, over 1,700 orders before a single passenger ever sat in one. Boeing promised it would be flying by 2020. It's 2026. It still hasn't delivered to a single airline. Here's why. Airbus built a new engine into a wing designed to hold it. Boeing tried to force that same size engine onto an airframe that's older than most of the pilots flying it. One company started from scratch. The other has spent 10 years fighting physics on a 50-year-old design. That one decision is why a plane unveiled in 2017 still isn't certified today. If you are enjoying this video, do us a favor to give us a like and subscribe if you haven't. To understand why the 737 MAX family has spent 9 years fighting for approval, you have to start with a shortcut. The original 737 was designed in the 1960s, low to the ground by intention, because back then, that made loading bags and boarding passengers faster. By the 2010s, that low ground clearance became a liability. Boeing wanted to hang a new generation of larger, more fuel-efficient engines under the wing, the same move Airbus made on the A320neo, but the 737's landing gear simply wasn't tall enough to fit them underneath in the traditional position. So Boeing's engineers moved the engines forward and higher up the wing instead, just far enough to clear the ground. It solved the clearance problem, but it created a new one. With the engine nacelles sitting further forward, the aircraft started generating extra lift right at the nose during high angle of attack situations, giving the plane a tendency to pitch upward that older 737s never had. Boeing didn't want to redesign the aircraft from the ground up, because a genuinely new design would have meant years of fresh certification and airlines paying to retrain every pilot who already flew a 737. So instead, Boeing wrote software to solve a hardware problem. That software was called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, MACHS, and its entire job was to automatically push the nose back down whenever it detected that dangerous pitch-up tendency, making the MAX handle enough like older 737s that pilots wouldn't need new type training. The system had 2 serious weaknesses. It relied on a reading from a single angle of attack sensor, with no cross-check against a second sensor to catch a fault. And Boeing did not disclose MACHS's existence in pilot training materials or manuals, so line pilots flying the aircraft had no idea the system was there, let alone how to react if it activated in error. In October 2018, a faulty angle of attack sensor on Lion Air Flight 610 fed MACHS false data. The system repeatedly pushed the nose down as the crew fought to pull it back up. The plane crashed into the Java Sea, killing all 189 people on board. Boeing called it an isolated failure. 5 months later, in March 2019, the same failure played out again on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, killing all 157 people on board. 2 brand new airplanes, the same sensor failure, the same software response, 346 people dead in total. The entire global MAX fleet was grounded within days and stayed grounded for 20 months. What came out during the investigations afterward was almost worse than the crashes themselves. Congressional investigators and the Department of Transportation's Inspector General found that the FAA had delegated large portions of the MAX's safety certification directly to Boeing's own engineers, a long-standing practice that regulators defended as efficient right up until it wasn't. On top of that, in January 2021, Boeing admitted, as part of a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice, that 2 of its own technical pilots had misled FAA regulators about how MACHS worked during the original certification process. The company that built the plane had also helped certify it, and then withheld the one detail that mattered most. That combination, self-certification plus concealment, is what rewrote the rules for every 737 MAX variant that hadn't been certified yet, including the MAX 10, which at that point hadn't even flown. Congress passed new legislation stripping away Boeing's old certification shortcuts and requiring any newly certified variant to meet modern cockpit alerting standards. The FAA made clear it would verify Boeing's engineering directly rather than take the company's word for it. The MAX 10 finally had its first flight in June 2021, 3.5 years after the first crash, flying straight into the strictest regulatory environment this aircraft family had ever faced. Then, on January 5, 2024, a door plug blew off an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 at 16,000 feet, tearing open the fuselage mid-flight. Nobody died, largely by luck. Investigators traced it to missing bolts from Boeing's own factory floor. The FAA capped Boeing's entire 737 production line at 38 jets a month and opened an intensive audit of manufacturing quality. That incident happened on an aircraft that had already been certified and flying commercially for years, and it had nothing to do with the MAX 10's design. But it told regulators that Boeing's quality problems weren't confined to 2018 and 2019, they were still happening, so the FAA slowed down even further on every variant still waiting for approval. While that was unfolding, Boeing hit a separate, purely technical wall. In 2023, the company disclosed a flaw in the engine anti-ice system shared across the MAX family, one that could overheat the engine inlet in certain icing conditions. The FAA's temporary fix for already flying MAX 8s and 9s was to instruct pilots not to run the anti-ice system unless they were actually in icing conditions. But the MAX 7 and MAX 10 couldn't certify around a workaround. Boeing had to redesign the system outright and prove it to the FAA from scratch. Boeing said in January 2024 the fix would take about a year. It took closer to 2. The MAX 10 carried one more complication that belonged to it alone. Its fuselage runs 1.5 meters longer than the MAX 9's, so engineers had to design a semi-levered landing gear that extends during rotation to keep the tail from striking the runway on takeoff. Another mechanical system that needed its own testing and validation. Stack it all up, and the MAX 10's 7-year wait isn't really one delay, it's 4. A software patch written to disguise a hardware compromise, a regulatory system that let the manufacturer grade its own homework, a manufacturing failure on a sister aircraft that erased whatever trust was left, and a genuine engineering fix that had to be built twice. By January 2026, there were finally real signs of movement. The FAA cleared the MAX 10 to begin the final phase of certification flight testing. By May 2026, Boeing's CEO told investors the company had finished testing the anti-ice redesign and was roughly 80% through the full flight test campaign, calling it the first real light at the end of the tunnel. The FAA's administrator said the agency hadn't found anything that would push certification past the end of the year. The smaller MAX 7 is now expected to certify first, around August 2026, with the MAX 10 expected to follow before year-end, and first deliveries landing sometime in 2027. Somewhere along the way, WestJet quietly became the airline positioned to take first delivery, while Ryanair sits on 300 combined orders, United on 277, and Alaska Airlines, the same airline that lived through the door plug blowout on its MAX 9, has since ordered over 100 MAX 10s of its own. Here's the uncomfortable part. Every one of these delays traces back to a single decision made years before the first MAX ever flew. Solve a hardware limitation with software, keep quiet about it, and let the manufacturer mark its own exam. Airbus never had to make that trade, because its engine sat where an engine was supposed to sit. Boeing is still paying for the version of the plane it built instead. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's actually been happening behind the delays, hit like, share it, and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.